The barn door creaked, and Ethan's heart shattered in the dim light. Lila, his bride of mere hours, stood tangled in the arms of another man, her wedding gown bunched around her waist. He froze, the bouquet in his hand trembling, as the world he'd built in his mind collapsed like a house of cards. Ethan had envisioned this day 1,000 times. The vows, the laughter, the promise of forever. Napa Valley's golden hills, with their endless rows of vineyards, had seemed the perfect backdrop for their love story. He'd spent months planning every detail. The wildflower centerpieces, the string quartet, the handwritten note he'd slipped into her bouquet. But now, as he stood in the shadow of the barn, the music from the reception fading behind him, all he could hear was the soft gasp of Lila's breath against the stranger's lips. He backed away, the bouquet slipping from his fingers, petals scattering on the dirt floor. His chest tightened, not with anger, but with a hollow ache that threatened to swallow him whole. He stumbled outside, the cool evening air hitting his face like a slap. The reception was in full swing, guests twirling under fairy lights, clinking glasses, oblivious to the wreckage of his heart. Ethan's eyes scanned the crowd, desperate for an anchor, something to hold him upright. That's when he saw Caleb. Lila's younger brother stood apart from the revelry, leaning against a wooden fence with a glass of wine in his hand. His charcoal suit hugged his lean frame, and his dark hair fell messily over his forehead. But it was his eyes, sharp, green, and impossibly steady, that caught Ethan's breath. Caleb was watching him, not with pity, but with a quiet understanding that felt like a lifeline. Ethan didn't know why, but he crossed the lawn toward him, each step heavier than the last. "You okay?" Caleb's voice was low, almost drowned out by the band playing a cover of some old love song. He didn't smile, didn't offer empty platitudes. His gaze held Ethan's, unflinching, as if he could see the storm raging inside him. Ethan opened his mouth to lie, to say he was fine, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he shook his head, his throat tight. "I just saw her, with someone else, in the barn." His voice cracked, and he hated how small it sounded. Caleb's jaw tightened, but he didn't look surprised. "Lila's always been reckless," he said carefully, setting his glass down on the fence post. "I'm sorry, Ethan. You don't deserve this." The sincerity in Caleb's words cut through the fog in Ethan's mind. He didn't know Caleb well. Lila's brother had always been a quiet presence, slipping in and out of family gatherings with a book or a sketchpad in hand. But now, standing under the Napa sky, Ethan felt an inexplicable pull toward him. Maybe it was the way Caleb didn't push, didn't demand answers, just stood there, steady as the earth beneath them. "I don't know what to do," Ethan admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I thought today was the start of everything. Now it's nothing." Caleb stepped closer, his shoulder brushing Ethan's. "It's not nothing," he said softly. "It's just different now. You get to decide what comes next." Those words lingered, sinking into Ethan's bones. He looked at Caleb, really looked at him, and for the first time that night, he felt something other than pain, a flicker of warmth, fragile but real. The reception carried on around them, laughter and music swirling like a dream. But in that moment, it was just the two of them, standing on the edge of something new. They talked as the night deepened, moving away from the crowd to a quiet corner of the vineyard. Caleb spoke of his life in San Francisco, his work as a graphic designer, his love for late-night jazz clubs, and foggy mornings by the bay. Ethan found himself sharing things he hadn't told anyone, not even Lila. How he'd grown up in a small Ohio town, always feeling like he didn't quite fit. How he'd moved to California to chase a bigger life, only to find himself tethered to someone who didn't truly see him. Caleb listened, his eyes never leaving Ethan's face. There was no judgment, no rush to fill the silence. And when Ethan's voice faltered, Caleb reached out, his hand resting lightly on Ethan's arm. The touch was brief, but it sent a jolt through Ethan's body, waking something he hadn't known was sleeping. "I don't know how to trust again," Ethan said, staring at the ground. Not after this. Caleb tilted his head, his expression soft but fierce. You don't have to trust everyone. Just start with yourself. You're stronger than you think, Ethan. The words hit harder than they should have. Ethan looked up, meeting Caleb's gaze, and for a moment, the world felt steady again. The betrayal still stung, but standing there with Caleb, he felt a spark of hope, a possibility he hadn't dared imagine. As the reception wound down, guests began to drift toward their cars, their laughter fading into the night. Ethan knew he'd have to face Lila soon, to confront the truth and unravel the life they planned. But for now, he wasn't ready to let go of this moment, of the quiet strength in Caleb's presence. Stay for a bit, Ethan said, almost a plea. Just talk to me. Caleb smiled, small but genuine. I'm not going anywhere. And as the stars blinked above the vineyard, Ethan felt the first stirrings of something he couldn't yet name, a connection that would change everything. The vineyard glowed under the moonlight, its rows of grapevines stretching into the darkness like silent witnesses. Ethan and Caleb sat on a low stone wall, the remnants of the reception, a scattering of wine glasses and crumpled napkins, barely visible in the distance. The air was heavy with the scent of earth and fermenting grapes, but to Ethan, it felt like the first time he could breathe all night. Caleb broke the silence, his voice soft but deliberate. You don't have to go back in there, you know. Not tonight. Not ever, if you don't want to. Ethan's laugh was bitter, his hands clenched in his lap. I can't just walk away. Everyone's expecting me to smile, to dance, to be the happy groom. What do I even say? Sorry, folks, the wedding's off because my bride was kissing someone else in the barn? Caleb's lips twitched, not quite a smile. You could. It'd be one hell of an exit line. Ethan snorted, the sound surprising him. For a moment, the weight on his chest lightened. He glanced at Caleb, who was staring out at the vineyard, his profile sharp against the silver light. There was something grounding about him, a quiet strength that made Ethan feel less like he was drowning. I don't even know who he was, Ethan said, the words spilling out before he could stop them. The guy with Lila. I didn't recognize him. How long has this been going on? How did I not see it? Caleb turned to him, his green eyes catching the moonlight. You're asking questions that don't have answers yet. And even if they did, they wouldn't change what happened. Lila made her choice. Now you make yours. Ethan's throat tightened. He wanted to scream, to demand answers, to rewind the night and unsee what he'd seen. But Caleb's words anchored him, pulling him back to the present. What would you do? He asked, almost desperate. If you were me. Caleb hesitated, his fingers tracing the edge of the stone wall. I walk away, he said finally. Not because it's easy, but because you deserve better than someone who'd betray you like that. You deserve someone who sees you. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Ethan's pulse quickened, not from anger but from the way Caleb's gaze held his, unwavering. He'd never noticed how expressive Caleb's eyes were, how they seemed to carry 1,000 unspoken thoughts. For a moment, he wondered what it would be like to be seen by someone like that, truly seen. They talked for hours, the conversation weaving through the wreckage of the night. Caleb shared stories of his childhood with Lila, how she'd always been the golden child, charming and impulsive, while he'd been the quiet one, sketching in corners and dreaming of a life beyond their small Oregon hometown. Ethan found himself opening up about his own past, his parents' divorce, his struggle to find his place in a world that often felt too big. With every word, the distance between them shrank, their shoulders brushing as they leaned closer. At some point, Caleb pulled a small sketchbook from his jacket pocket. I always carry this, he said, flipping it open to reveal intricate drawings, cityscapes, faces, moments captured in pencil and ink. One page showed a man's silhouette against the sunset, his posture heavy with grief. Ethan's breath caught. It looked like him. Is that? He started, unable to finish. Caleb's cheeks flushed, and he snapped the sketchbook shut. Just a sketch, he said quickly, but his eyes betrayed him, flickering with something vulnerable. Ethan didn't push. He couldn't. Not when his own heart was racing with a feeling he couldn't name. Instead, he pointed to the stars above. "Tell me about those," he said, desperate for a distraction. "You seem like the kind of guy who knows constellations." Caleb laughed, a soft, warm sound that made Ethan's chest ache in a different way. "I'm no astronomer, but I can fake it." He pointed to a cluster of stars. "That's Orion, I think. The hunter, always chasing something he can't quite catch." Ethan followed his gaze, the stars blurring as his thoughts churned. He'd been chasing something too, a perfect life, a perfect love. But maybe what he'd been searching for was right here, in the quiet space between words, in the warmth of Caleb's presence. As the night grew colder, Caleb shrugged off his jacket and draped it over Ethan's shoulders. The gesture was small, but it felt enormous, like a promise. Ethan's fingers brushed Caleb's as he adjusted the jacket, and for a moment, neither of them moved. The air crackled with possibility, with the weight of what might come next. "I don't know what I'm doing," Ethan whispered, his voice raw. "I don't know who I am anymore." Caleb's hand lingered on his arm, steady and warm. "You're Ethan," he said simply, "and that's enough." The words broke something open in Ethan, a flood of emotions he hadn't let himself feel. He wanted to lean into Caleb, to let the world fall away, but the sound of footsteps interrupted them. A guest, tipsy and laughing, stumbled toward the vineyard, calling out for someone named Sarah. The spell broke, and Ethan pulled back, his heart pounding. "We should head back," Caleb said, though his voice held a trace of reluctance. "They'll notice you're gone soon." Ethan nodded, but he didn't move. He wasn't ready to face the crowd, the questions, the inevitable confrontation with Lila. Not yet. For now, he wanted to hold on to this fragile, unexpected connection that felt like the only real thing in a night full of lies. The reception tent glowed like a beacon, its fairy lights casting a warm haze over the remaining guests. Ethan stood at the edge of the vineyard, Caleb's jacket still around his shoulders, the weight of it grounding him. He knew he couldn't hide forever, but every step toward the tent felt like walking into a fire. Caleb walked beside him, his presence a quiet reassurance. "You don't have to do this alone," he said, his voice steady. "I'll stay with you if you want." Ethan glanced at him, gratitude mixing with the chaos in his chest. "You don't have to get dragged into this mess. It's my disaster." Caleb's lips curved into a half smile. "I'm already in it. Might as well see it through." They stepped into the tent, the music and laughter hitting Ethan like a wave. Guests swirled around the dance floor, oblivious to the storm brewing in his heart. He scanned the crowd for Lila, his pulse racing. Part of him wanted to confront her, to demand answers. Another part wanted to run. "There she is," Caleb said quietly, nodding toward the far side of the tent. Lila stood near the bar, her white gown glowing under the lights, laughing with a group of friends. The man from the barn was nowhere in sight, but her smile, bright, effortless, cut Ethan deeper than the betrayal itself. How could she look so untouched, so happy, while his world was in pieces? Ethan's hands clenched at his sides. "I need to talk to her," he said, more to himself than to Caleb. Caleb's hand brushed his arm, a fleeting touch. "You sure? You don't owe her anything right now." "I know," Ethan said, his voice tight. "But I need to do this. For me." Caleb nodded, stepping back, but staying close enough to be a quiet anchor. Ethan took a deep breath and crossed the tent, each step heavier than the last. Lila turned as he approached, her smile faltering for a fraction of a second before she recovered. "Ethan, there you are." Her voice was bright, too bright, like she was performing for the crowd. "Where have you been? I was starting to think you'd run off with the cake." The guests around her laughed, but Ethan's stomach twisted. He could still see her in the barn, her lips on someone else's, her hands clutching a stranger's shirt. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low but firm. "Now." Lila's eyes flickered with something, guilt, maybe, or defiance. She excused herself from the group and followed him to a quieter corner of the tent, her gown swishing against the floor. The music faded to a dull hum as Ethan faced her, his heart pounding. "I saw you," he said, the words spilling out like a dam breaking. "In the barn. With him." Lila's face went pale, but she didn't flinch. "Ethan, I—" "Don't." He cut her off, his voice shaking. "Don't lie to me. I saw you. How long has this been going on? Was any of this real?" Her lips parted, but no words came. For the first time, Lila looked small, stripped of her charm and confidence. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," she said finally, her voice barely audible. "I didn't mean to hurt you." "Didn't mean to?" Ethan's laugh was sharp, bitter. "You were kissing someone else on our wedding day, Lila. What did you think that would do to me?" Tears welled in her eyes, but Ethan felt no urge to comfort her. The woman he'd loved, the woman he'd built his future around, felt like a stranger now. "Who is he?" he asked, needing to know even though it hurt. "His name's Ryan," she said, her voice breaking. "He's someone from work. It just happened, Ethan. I swear I didn't plan it." The words were a knife, twisting deeper. "It just happened," he repeated, his voice hollow. "That's supposed to make it better?" Lila reached for his hand, but he pulled back. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I love you, Ethan." Ethan stared at her, the woman he'd thought he'd spend his life with. Her words rang empty, excuses that couldn't undo the betrayal. "You didn't just break my heart, Lila," he said quietly. "You broke my trust." He turned away, unable to look at her any longer. The tent felt suffocating, the laughter and music a cruel contrast to the ache in his chest. He walked blindly toward the exit, his vision blurring, until he felt a hand on his shoulder. "Caleb. You okay?" Caleb's voice was soft, but it cut through the noise. Ethan shook his head, unable to speak. Caleb didn't push, just guided him outside, away from the tent, and back into the cool night air. They stopped near a cluster of oak trees, the vineyard stretching out before them like a dark sea. "You did what you needed to do," Caleb said, his voice steady. "That took guts." Ethan let out a shaky breath. "I don't feel brave. I feel lost." Caleb's hand lingered on his shoulder, warm and grounding. "You're not lost," he said. "You're just finding a new path." Ethan looked at him, the moonlight catching the sharp lines of Caleb's face. There was no pity in his expression, only a quiet strength that made Ethan feel like he could keep going. And for the first time that night, he let himself wonder what it would be like to let someone new in, not to replace Lila, but to start something entirely different. The night air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of oak and grapevines. Ethan and Caleb sat on a wooden bench near the edge of the vineyard, the reception's distant music a faint echo. Ethan's hands were still trembling, the confrontation with Lila replaying in his mind like a broken record. But Caleb's presence beside him was a quiet tether, keeping him from spiraling. "You didn't have to stay," Ethan said, breaking the silence. "This isn't your fight." Caleb shrugged, his shoulder brushing Ethan's. "Maybe not, but I'm not here for the fight. I'm here for you." The words landed softly, but they carried a weight that made Ethan's chest tighten. He looked at Caleb, searching his face for a hint of what this was, what it could be. Caleb's green eyes met his, steady and unguarded, and for a moment, Ethan forgot the pain, the betrayal, the wreckage of the night. There was only this fragile, unexpected connection that felt like a lifeline. "I don't even know what I'm doing anymore," Ethan admitted, his voice raw. "I thought I had it all figured out. Lila, the wedding, the future. Now it's all gone." Caleb leaned back, his gaze drifting to the stars. "Maybe that's not such a bad thing," he said. "Sometimes things have to fall apart to make room for something better." Ethan wanted to believe him, but doubt gnawed at him. What if I'm not ready for something better? What if I'm too broken to start over? Caleb turned to him, his expression fierce. "You're not broken, Ethan. You're hurt. There's a difference, and you don't have to start over alone." The words hung between them, heavy with possibility. Ethan's heart raced, not from fear, but from something new, something that scared him in a different way. He'd never looked at another man the way he was looking at Caleb now, not with this kind of intensity, this kind of need. It was unfamiliar, unsettling, but felt right. They sat in silence for a while, the night wrapping around them like a cocoon. Caleb pulled out his sketchbook again, flipping to a blank page. "Want to see something?" he asked, his voice light but tinged with nervousness. Ethan nodded, curious. Caleb's pencil moved across the page, quick and sure, sketching the outline of the vineyard, the rolling hills, the rows of vines, the faint glow of the reception tent. But in the foreground, he drew two figures sitting on a bench, their shoulders close, their faces turned toward each other. It was them, captured in a moment of quiet intimacy. Ethan's throat tightened. "You're good," he said, his voice thick. "Really good." Caleb smiled, a little shy. "It's just how I see things. How I see you." The words hit Ethan like a wave, stirring something deep inside him. He reached out, his fingers brushing Caleb's as he took the sketchbook. Their hands lingered, the touch electric, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Ethan's heart pounded, his mind racing with questions he wasn't ready to answer. But he didn't pull away. The sound of laughter broke the moment, a group of guests stumbling out of the tent, their voices loud in the quiet night. Ethan handed the sketchbook back, his fingers tingling where they'd touched Caleb's. "We should probably head back," he said, though he didn't want to. Caleb nodded, but his eyes held Ethan's for a moment longer. "Whenever you're ready," he said, and Ethan knew he wasn't just talking about the reception. They walked back to the tent, the music growing louder with each step. Ethan's mind was a tangle of emotions, grief, anger, confusion, and something new, something that felt like hope. He stole a glance at Caleb, who was watching the crowd with a quiet intensity, and wondered what it would be like to let himself fall into this feeling, to let it carry him somewhere new. Inside the tent, the party was winding down. Guests were gathering their coats, saying their goodbyes. Lila was nowhere in sight, and for the first time, Ethan was grateful for her absence. He wasn't ready to face her again, not yet, but he was ready for something else, something he couldn't quite name, but could feel in the way Caleb's presence steadied him. As they reached the edge of the dance floor, Caleb turned to him. "One dance," he said, his voice teasing but soft. "No one's watching, just you and me." Ethan hesitated, his heart racing. He'd never danced with a man before, never even considered it. But the way Caleb looked at him, open and unafraid, made him want to try. He took Caleb's hand, the touch warm and sure, and let himself be led to the dance floor. The music slowed, a soft ballad filling the air. Caleb's hand rested lightly on Ethan's waist, guiding him with a confidence that made Ethan's nerves settle. They moved together, awkward at first, then finding a rhythm. Ethan's hand rested on Caleb's shoulder, and he felt the strength beneath the fabric, the quiet steadiness that had carried him through the night. For the first time that day, Ethan didn't feel like he was falling apart. He felt like he was beginning. The dance floor was nearly empty, the last strains of the ballad fading into the night. Ethan and Caleb swayed together, their movements slow and deliberate, as if the world beyond the tent didn't exist. Ethan's hand tightened on Caleb's shoulder, anchoring himself to this moment, to the warmth of Caleb's touch and the steady rhythm of his breath. "I've never done this before," Ethan said, his voice barely audible over the music. "Dancing like this, with someone like you." Caleb's lips curved into a soft smile. "First time for everything," he said, his hand steady on Ethan's waist. "You're doing fine." Ethan's heart pounded, not from fear, but from the realization that he didn't want this to end. The betrayal, the pain, the wreckage of his plans with Lila, they were still there, lurking in the corners of his mind. But here, with Caleb, they felt distant like a storm that had passed. As the song ended, Caleb stepped back, but his hand lingered in Ethan's for a moment longer. "You okay?" he asked, his green eyes searching Ethan's face. Ethan nodded, though he wasn't sure it was true. "Better than I was," he said, managing a small smile. Thanks to you. Caleb's cheeks flushed, and he looked away, suddenly shy. I didn't do much. Just stayed. That's enough, Ethan said, and he meant it. They moved off the dance floor, finding a quiet corner near the bar. The tent was thinning out, guests drifting toward their cars, their laughter fading into the night. Ethan's eyes scanned the crowd, half expecting to see Lila, but she was still gone. He wondered where she was, what she was doing, but the thought didn't hurt as much as it had before. Caleb handed him a glass of water, their fingers brushing again. The touch was fleeting, but it sent a spark through Ethan's veins. He took a sip, trying to steady himself. What happens now? He asked, more to himself than to Caleb. Caleb leaned against the bar, his expression thoughtful. You decide, he said. You could go back to your life, pretend this night never happened. Or you could start something new, something honest. Ethan's chest tightened. Honest. The word felt like a challenge, a call to be braver than he'd ever been. He'd spent so long building a life around Lila, around the idea of who he thought he should be. But now, standing here with Caleb, he wondered if he'd been chasing the wrong things all along. I don't know if I'm ready for that, he admitted, his voice low. This is a lot. Caleb nodded, no judgment in his eyes. You don't have to decide tonight. Just don't close the door on it. They sat in silence for a while, watching the last of the guests leave. The tent felt emptier now, the fairy lights casting long shadows across the floor. Ethan's mind was a tangle of questions about Lila, about himself, about the man sitting beside him. But for the first time, he didn't feel the need to have all the answers. Caleb pulled out his sketchbook again, flipping to a new page. Mind if I draw you? He asked, his voice soft. Ethan raised an eyebrow, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Me? I'm not exactly model material right now. Caleb's eyes met his, warm and steady. You're more than you think. Ethan's breath caught, and he nodded, feeling oddly exposed but safe. Caleb's pencil moved across the page, capturing the lines of Ethan's face, the curve of his jaw, the weight in his eyes. Ethan watched, mesmerized by the way Caleb saw him, not as a broken groom, but as something more. When Caleb finished, he turned the sketchbook toward Ethan. The drawing was simple but striking, Ethan's face rendered with a quiet intensity that made his heart ache. That's how you see me? He asked, his voice thick. Caleb nodded, his expression soft. That's who you are. Ethan stared at the sketch, his throat tight. He didn't recognize the man in the drawing. Not because it wasn't accurate, but because it showed a version of himself he'd never seen. Someone strong, someone worthy of being seen. The night was winding down, the vineyard quiet except for the hum of crickets and the occasional clink of glass as the staff cleaned up. Ethan knew he'd have to face reality soon. The questions from family, the fallout with Lila, the unraveling of his carefully planned life. But for now, he wanted to hold on to this moment, this feeling of being truly seen. Stay with me, he said suddenly, the words spilling out before he could stop them. Just for a little longer. Caleb's smile was small but warm. I'm not going anywhere, he said, and Ethan believed him. The vineyard was silent now, the last of the guests gone, the reception tent a hollow shell of fairy lights and empty tables. Ethan and Caleb walked along a dirt path between the rows of grapevines, their footsteps soft against the earth. The night air was cool, but Caleb's jacket around Ethan's shoulders kept the chill at bay. Ethan's mind was a storm of emotions, grief for what he'd lost, anger at Lila's betrayal, and something new, something that flickered every time Caleb's arm brushed his. He didn't know what to call it, this pull toward Caleb, but it was real, and it scared him as much as it thrilled him. You don't have to figure it all out tonight, Caleb said, as if reading his thoughts. Give yourself time. Ethan stopped walking, turned to face him. Time for what? To get over her? To figure out what this is? He gestured vaguely between them, his voice trembling. Caleb's eyes softened, but he didn't look away. Both, maybe, or neither. Just time to be you, without anyone else's expectations. Ethan let out a shaky laugh. I don't even know who that is anymore. Caleb stepped closer, his voice low but firm. Then let's find out. Together. The words hit Ethan like a current, pulling him under. He looked at Caleb, really looked at him. The sharp lines of his face, the quiet intensity in his eyes, the way he stood close but not too close, giving Ethan space to breathe. And in that moment, Ethan made a choice. Not a grand, life-altering decision, but a small one, a step towards something new. He reached for Caleb's hand, his fingers tentative but sure. Caleb's hand closed around his, warm and steady. And for the first time that night, Ethan felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. They walked further into the vineyard, the stars bright above them. Caleb talked about his life in San Francisco, his small apartment filled with art supplies and secondhand books, his dream of opening a gallery someday. Ethan listened, hanging on to every word, marveling at how easy it felt to be with him. There was no pretense, no pressure, just a quiet understanding that made Ethan feel like he could be himself, whoever that was. At some point, they stopped near a small clearing, a wooden bench tucked beneath an oak tree. They sat, their shoulders close, and Caleb pulled out his sketchbook again. One more, he said, his voice teasing. For the road. Ethan laughed, the sound lighter than it had been all night. You're going to run out of pages. Caleb grinned, his pencil already moving. This time, he sketched the vineyard, the vines, the bench, the stars above. But in the center, he drew two figures, their hands intertwined, their faces turned toward each other. Ethan watched, his heart swelling with something he couldn't name. When Caleb finished, he handed the sketchbook to Ethan. Keep it, he said. Something to remember tonight by. Ethan took the sketchbook, his fingers brushing Caleb's. I don't think I'll ever forget tonight, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Caleb's smile was soft, almost shy. Good. They sat in silence for a while, the vineyard stretching out around them like a world of its own. Ethan's mind was still a tangle of questions, but they didn't feel as heavy now. With Caleb beside him, he felt like he could face them, one at a time. As the first hints of dawn crept over the horizon, Ethan knew they couldn't stay here forever. The real world was waiting. The fallout with Lila, the questions from family, the life he'd have to rebuild. But for now, he wasn't ready to let go of this moment, of the warmth of Caleb's hand in his. Let's get out of here, Ethan said suddenly, the words surprising even himself. Just for a little while. Somewhere that's not this. Caleb raised an eyebrow, a spark of mischief in his eyes. You sure? Ethan nodded, a smile tugging at his lips. Yeah, I'm sure. Caleb stood, offering his hand. Then let's go. Ethan took it, his heart racing with a mix of fear and excitement. He didn't know where they were going or what came next, but for the first time in hours, he felt like he was moving forward. The first rays of dawn painted the Napa Valley sky in shades of pink and gold, casting a soft glow over the vineyard. Ethan and Caleb drove down a winding road in Caleb's beat-up sedan, the windows cracked open to let in the cool morning air. Ethan's suit was rumpled, his tie long gone, but he felt lighter than he had in hours, maybe years. Where are we going? Ethan asked, glancing at Caleb, who was focused on the road, one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the gear shift. Caleb's lips curved into a small smile. There's a diner a few miles from here. Best pancakes in the valley. Figure we could use some breakfast. Ethan laughed, the sound surprising him. Pancakes sound perfect. They pulled into the parking lot of a small, retro diner, its neon sign buzzing faintly in the early morning light. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and bacon, and a waitress with a kind smile waved them to a booth by the window. They ordered pancakes and coffee, the normalcy of it grounding Ethan in a way he hadn't expected. As they waited for their food, Caleb leaned back in the booth, his green eyes catching the light. You holding up okay? He asked, his voice soft but direct. Ethan thought about it, really thought about it. The pain of Lila's betrayal was still there, a dull ache in his chest, but it didn't consume him anymore. Sitting across from Caleb, with the morning light streaming through the window, he felt something new. Hope, maybe, or the beginning of something real. "I think I will be," he said finally, meeting Caleb's gaze. "Thanks to you." Caleb's cheeks flushed, and he looked down at his coffee, a shy smile tugging at his lips. "I didn't do much. Just showed up." "You did more than that," Ethan said, his voice steady. "You saw me. Really saw me. I don't think anyone's ever done that before." Caleb's eyes met his, and for a moment, the world fell away. The diner, the hum of conversation, the clatter of plates, it all faded, leaving just the two of them, tethered by something unspoken but undeniable. The waitress brought their pancakes, breaking the moment, and they ate in comfortable silence, stealing glances between bites. Ethan felt a warmth spreading through him, not just from the food, but from the realization that he was starting to see himself through Caleb's eyes, someone strong, someone worthy of love. As they finished, Caleb reached across the table, his hand resting lightly on Ethan's. "What now?" he asked, his voice gentle but curious. Ethan looked at their joined hands, his heart racing. He didn't have all the answers, but for the first time, that didn't scare him. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but want to find out. With you." Caleb's smile was bright, unguarded, and it lit something inside Ethan that he thought had gone dark. "Then we'll figure out together," Caleb said, squeezing his hand. They left the diner as the sun climbed higher, the valley stretching out before them like a promise. Ethan knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be questions, heartbreak, and a life to rebuild. But with Caleb by his side, he felt ready to face it one step at a time. As they drove back toward the vineyard, Ethan glanced at the sketchbook on the seat between them, its pages filled with moments they'd shared. It was a reminder of the night that had changed everything, not just the pain, but the unexpected beauty that had come from it. He didn't know where this path would lead, but for the first time in a long time, he was excited to find out. And as the car wound through the golden hills, Ethan reached for Caleb's hand, holding on tight. The future was uncertain, but it was his to shape, and he wasn't walking it alone.